Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. Episode 66 of The Human Experience is Vanessa's story. Vanessa's life as a television producer and a mom with young kids was hectic, but it was also a space in which she thrived. The networking, the collaboration, the fast pace. As she was preparing to take a step back from her work as a producer to spend more time with her family, an illness would take hold that changed her life forever. Overnight, Vanessa became blind and paralyzed. She spent the next year of her life working to get her vision and mobility back, while simultaneously and painstakingly recording her progress. This life-altering event would lead her to explore sight and the mind, resulting in a science-art collaboration with Cambridge Neuroscientists, a TEDx talk, and 2 books. As a former skeptic of mindfulness and other alternative modalities, Vanessa has found purpose in offering practical and accessible ways for all to find healing. This episode was recorded in London, England. Thank you for letting us record in your home, first of all. It's so lovely when people do that because, I get to see a little slice of your life as well. We have been in touch for probably like 6 months ago. We got in touch with each other, and you have quite a fascinating story. But I really want to know what that means to you. Where does your story begin for you?
Oh, where does it begin? Really difficult to answer that question. And you're very welcome, by the way. Welcome to the chaos that is my home.
It's lovely.
It's funny because it does feel like a big circle, and I find this in life. You start off one place and you find yourself going in this enormous, great big loop, and you kind of come full circle back to where you started, and then you have a little small laugh to yourself. But the great thing about that big looping effect is that you learn a heck of a lot of stuff along the way. So I suppose if you want to go back in time, it would probably be to my production days. That was the very beginning of it. So that I was a television producer for 20 years, working in the commercials industry, basically making TV ads. Okay. If anybody can remember a TV ad, we fast forward them, we eliminate them, we avoid them like
the plague.
Absolutely. We make memes of them. I've had loads of mine made into memes.
That's interesting.
Oh yes, some really funny stuff actually. So I made TV commercials for a variety of different clients. I had lots of fun doing that, and it kind of gives you a whole bunch of skills. So you have to be organizer, you have to be quite bossy, you have to be on everything, on everyone. You have to be a jack of all trades and master of none, which is that classic thing where you have to know a little bit about what everybody's doing, but also how it all stitches together. So I am the person that keeps things going, and that has been a narrative throughout my entire life. I've always been the motivator, the pusher, the ideas person, the person who is being kind of the main cog in amongst lots of other cogs, probably is a way to describe it. So I did that for 20 years, and I suppose the story that you are the big thing that everyone thinks of me for happened right at the very end of that period. I'd actually, it's a bit of a rat race, is TV production. Anybody who is in it will roll their eyes and go, yeah, family life. You work long hours. It's tough. It's loads of fun. It's some pretty intense people, intense situations. There's a lot of stress involved. But I'd managed to kind of get out of a main agency, and I got into the dream position of freelancing. I'd done the rounds. I'd been ahead of TV. I'd won awards. So I was in quite a comfortable position. Freelancing, I was doing it 4 days a week. I had 2 tiny little children. So I was actually going to make this massive, great big leap and have time off and spend the summer with my kids. And that was my plan. And it was a brilliant plan. And then, of course, this huge curveball came in. And that is, I think, the story that you possibly would be interested to hear more about.
Well, I'm interested in all of it. I guess I didn't realize that was your background, production, TV production, commercial production. I think it's fascinating, a fascinating line of work. I feel like, is it difficult to break into? Because it kind of seems like something so far off when you talk about, just working in that sphere, in that space, creating something to cater to a mass audience.
Yes. I mean, I do talks. I haven't done for a while, but I've done plenty of talks to school children and young people about getting into television. It's very hard. You have to be, and maybe again, this is a theme that's kind of carried in my life. You have to do more than everyone else. It's above and beyond. And actually, as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh yes, I can see that all over the place. you do more. Even to do an arts-based degree back in the day when I did it, there were thousands of applicants for very few courses. I think the ratio was 1 to 40 for the courses that I was doing. I did a degree in photography. So I've been used to competition for a long, long time. So it's a very competitive industry. You have to stand out. You have to be good. But also, one of the things I realised that actually probably made me successful in it, not initially, I struggled a lot, like a lot of my colleagues, to kind of get a foot in the door, was you have to be collaborative. And it's really weird because the industry is but I'm not sure now, I haven't worked in the industry for a long time, but there seemed to be a bit of an us and them kind of ethos. And I'm very collaborative. I love asking questions. I hate working on my own. Writing a book was a nightmare for me. I had to go up to the cafe and sit with my computer and talk to people before I could go and write. I don't work very well on my own. So I like collaborating with other people. I like finding out information. And over time, I realized that was what was going to probably get me further than anything else. So networking, getting to know people, asking people questions. And again, that's a major theme. So I think if somebody does want to get into this industry, you have to do all those other things. It's not just, be clever or do the right courses. It's all the other background, the soft skills, if you like.
Sure. I think especially the networking piece, that's a great rule for life in general, right? I mean, you do get further with the more space that you open up to be collaborative, to the more people you know.
100%. Every single thing I have done since that career has been through collaboration. It's been through talking to people, asking questions, being a little bit nosy, and then taking an opportunity that maybe isn't even there and making it into something, make it into something new. So basically, I had a very severe illness. I should probably, explain what that kind of context is. In 2012, I'd got this incredible gig to work 4 days a week and freelancing. I was also mentoring. I was starting a new business, doing training and best practice, and it was all going very well. And I took the summer off. Well, I was about to take the summer off, and I had to take the summer off. And then it was at the end of the summer. I was about to go back, actually. And I basically had a terrible virus, like a completely floor you virus. And it knocked me out for 3 weeks. And then as I was recovering, we went and had a day out at one of those big flower festivals. And I started to feel really unwell again. And by the time I came back, I kind of knew something was really, really wrong. And basically within 72 hours, I'd lost my sight and my mobility. So I was basically lying in a hospital bed, blind and paralyzed, with 2 tiny children back at home and a family in absolute meltdown because, as I've described, I'm kind of the linchpin. So that was, a very difficult time. I was only in hospital, actually, when I look back, it wasn't long for 2 weeks, because they kind of, they did what they could. They didn't even know really what it was. It was a very rare neurological illness.
Wow.
And my sight went to absolutely nothing. It went to completely blackout. And I couldn't walk. So I lost all the feeling in my feet and my hands, all the way up to my elbows. So I couldn't hold a fork. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't walk. I was really quite ill. And when you have to pass certain tests to be able to leave hospital, I had to walk enough steps. And I did that with help with sticks and with other people and braces on my feet. So I had to learn to do all these things again. I had to learn how to make a cup of tea. They have a fake kitchen in the hospital and they make you make a cup of tea. And I had to do it while I was legally blind, feeling my way into the fridge, feeling my way onto the top and, getting sugar instead of tea and, all of these things. And then they send you home.
Wow.
So I was literally sent home. And we just had to cope. We had to get on with it. And I think this is where the producer thing kicks in. So I kind of made plans, and I'd done something which when I relate sounds probably unusual. To me, made a lot of sense. And I'd been recording everything. So I recorded everything initially to family who were then writing in diaries, very, very unhappy about doing that. They didn't like doing it. They found it. There's so many other things they felt I should be doing, but I needed to record what was happening. I needed to document it. Partly because I kind of wanted the data so that I could then think about it properly. Because you just go into like a slow train crash mode and everything goes into slow motion and everyone's just in survival mode. I mean, they're walking around my room. I can't see them, of course. And they're they're whispering.
Maybe she can't hear us.
You. I actually know which side of the room you're at because of the way your feet are squeaking. So I can hear you talking about brain tumours and multiple sclerosis and multiple other horrible things, which none of them, were what it was. But so it was a scary time. So they sent me home, and I made a plan to recover, and that was unquestioned. My prognosis was, we hope you'll get better. And then I was like, well, no, that's not good enough.
Wow.
So I started a series of experiments around my home. I would count steps. If I could walk steps, I had the stick. Actually, and the children were only 2 and 4 at the time.
Oh, my word.
So they were little sods. Children don't understand when mum's ill or mum's blind. They leave their toys all over the place. It was the normal family chaos. And that was great because those became challenges, which became part of my recovery. So they'd steal my walking stick. Of course, I'd hear them, whispering. Oh. And the tap, 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 tap. If they run up, grab the stick and then as they run away with it. And so I would have to go after them and get it. And that meant I had to walk and I had to navigate around the room. And I had to do those things because there's a 2-year-old, well, actually it was 18 months, who was a nightmare because they are at that age. And so it forced me to recover and forced me probably to physically recover faster than I might have done otherwise. And I did these other experiments. So the walking was easier to explain. So friends were amazing. People came and visited me. I was like the dog that everyone came and walked. And so my friends would literally come and take me out and I would walk further and further and further every single day. So I could say, look, we did 50 meters today. I did 40 meters yesterday. It's measurable benefit, impact, easy. Sight doesn't switch back on. So I went to complete black. When my vision first came back, it came back as a big cloudy mist. So it was 2-dimensional. It was flat. There was no 2 dimensions, rather. It was completely flat. It was monovision. I had no color, no shape, no faces, no forms. I didn't know if I was in a room. I didn't know where I was. And slowly over time, shapes and edges would start to come back in, lines would come in, and contrast. And so I started to get very curious about this and I wanted to understand it. So the experiments were around seeing what my visual recovery was, like what facet of my vision had come back. Is it these lines, or is it this contrast, or is it some color? Because vision is made up of lots of different elements. It's not just one thing. Or is it acuity? So that's acuity, sharpness. There's all these different factors that I was measuring. And I did that through having certain objects in the house at a particular distance and then looking at them every single time at the same time of day in the same way. And one of them was a shower gel bottle. That was the easiest to control. Everyone got told, don't touch the shower gel bottle. That was easy. And so I measured it, and I had a dictaphone, and I recorded data for 6 months every single day. And I would record really minute detail, even down to how I felt, what had happened, masses of data. And I could see changes and tiny, sometimes it wouldn't even be a change. I just feel that there was one coming. So if someone came around and they said, how's your vision? Of course, they all ask that. I go, well, on the shower gel bottle, on the left edge, I feel like the label might have it might have a different color on it. And they'd be like, oh, you don't know how massive that is, because it was only 2 weeks ago I realized there's a label on the bottle. And only 2 weeks before that I could actually even see the top rim of the bottle. Now I can see the whole outline of the bottle. You don't understand how big, So this is what I did for 6 months. And the experiment ended when I could see the whole bottle, the labels, the lettering. I'd see the letters bit by bit by bit. Again, some irony in that I did branding, advertisements. I've shot shower gel bottles. So here I was, using the products I'd sold, if you like, to recover. And on the very last day of doing this, I suddenly realized that the label, which I thought was white, wasn't. It was graduated, and it was actually translucent at the top of the bottle. It was like a yellowy, it sort of went from white to yellow. And this was such a subtle detail. I grabbed the bottle and I went running to the window to just check that I got it right. And my husband stood next to me and went, well, then that's over, isn't it? But these were the things I did. I did multiple other things as well. All the things I've written about in my first book. So some of the stuff was crazy, measuring road signs. I mean, I really was the crazy lady locally going around. And colour, when it returned, it didn't just come back. Colours would spit and fizz. They would be like effervescent. They would move. And that's a form of acquired synesthesia. So lots of weird stuff happened. And all of that got me extremely curious. And that's where my networking kicked in again, because I started to ask questions. Why? What is this weird stuff happening? And that took me on the journey that became where I suppose I've got to now, which was going and finding scientists, because I wouldn't have a science network, finding scientists to ask questions, and the right scientists. I didn't really know what a neuroscientist was, other than the obvious that they study brains.
Yeah.
But I eventually, through networking and meeting people and asking questions, got introduced to Tristan Beckenstein at Cambridge University, and he studies consciousness. I was like, well, what's that? It's like, what, thinking?
Yeah.
Of course, it's a lot more than that now. And in the meantime, whilst I was curious, I was putting together loads of ideas. I'm a producer. I'm a creative producer. I come up with stuff. And I'd put together what I thought was some kind of exhibition, a neuroscience exhibition. When I took it to Tristan, it was 27 pages long, and it had fully fleshed out installations and all sorts. And he was like, oh my God, you are like the craziest patient that we've ever had in the lab, but I love this. And so we worked together. One of my installations we brought to life, and that was launched at the Cambridge Science Festival in 2015. And that basically was a very complex project, but in short, what it was is we converted the public's mindful brainwaves into music and art. We recorded those brain frequencies using EEG, electroencephalography. I have to say it slowly. Still have to say it slowly. And so that meant that the public would come in, and someone would sit and they'd have a headset put on, and there's lots of little electrodes on their scalp, and these record their live brain frequencies. So all the neurons that are firing, and what those frequencies can tell us is what physiological state they're in. So are they agitated? Are they relaxed? Are they asleep? We could actually pretty much see that from someone's EEG. And the reason that we wanted to record their brainwaves while they were meditating is because I'd used a lot of meditation during my recovery as an incredible tool to calm my nervous system. Because whilst I talk about doing experiments and everything else, it was an incredibly stressful time, and I suffered huge anxiety, not surprisingly, and PTSD and all the things you would expect. And visualization practices and breathing practices and different types of meditation practices were so helpful. They made a huge difference. And that's what this installation was around. It was understanding, because often when you're ill, if you're in that situation, you feel powerless. Me particularly, I was lying in a bed, I couldn't move. So what have you got? You've got to rely on the people around you or yourself. And there is a decision, there's a choice that happens in those moments. And I kind of knew there wasn't some sensible conversation where, all right, I just must use my mind now to get through this. But there was some kind of understanding beyond my kind of cognition that I knew I had to protect myself. I knew I had to, that this was going to be a lot to do with me and probably a lot less to do with the doctors, because they didn't know what was wrong. And so I did use my mind, and I used my mind in all sorts of ways I couldn't have dreamt of. I was not a meditator. I was not experienced. I'd done hypnobirthing with my second child, and that had been very successful. And hypnobirthing is simply using visualization, but self-hypnosis. Not everybody gets on with that. I did. So I could put myself into a hypnotic state very easily. And the visualizations that you use in antenatal classes are very, very relaxing. They're a really good way to, if you think about having a baby, it can be a stressful situation, but your whole body is on, quite high alert. It's a very big experience for your body. So these practices are there to help you release the right neurochemicals. You want oxytocin, you want the love chemical, you want to be feeling connected. You want to be part of this experience and embracing it and riding it. You don't want to be fighting it. So you don't want adrenaline. So these practices are very good at getting us into the right physiological state, creating the right kind of neurobalance, if you like. And so I just took them and put them into my situation in the hospital, and it worked a dream, absolute dream. And so that's what I went to Tristan with and said, can we somehow capture what I did in that hospital and show people that when they feel helpless, or that they think that, that there's nothing they can do, that there's a huge amount you can do, but you do it for yourself. So that was the big collaboration. I can't even remember what your question was.
It doesn't even matter, because that was fantastic. I am just so, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and it's really difficult. And I think that's kind of the point, to lose a sense, like, well, you lost your eyesight, but you also lost your mobility. So as an adult with a very busy and hectic life, and to go from 100 to 0 pretty immediately. I mean, you had this virus, but prior to, it was pretty like it just shut off for you, the vision and your mobility. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're healing from this virus, and who among us has not had a virus and feeling like they're knocking on death's door, and then to kind of have it go even further. What was it? What did it feel like to have this happen and then not know whether or not it was permanent?
Well, one of the things that, again, lying in a bed, you've got time to think. And this is something I battled with for a long time. So I'm not going to say that I suddenly, had some snap my fingers and got this. But one of the things that you, first of all, have to acknowledge that you are living with is constant uncertainty. And that is deeply anxiety inducing, because we live in a society that has these expectations of knowledge, of knowing, of forecasting, and brains are predicting machines. We like to predict what's going to happen. So to live with uncertainty it feels very unnatural. It feels very frightening. And of course, I kind of knew that I didn't want to live in a frightened state, because that's shutting down all the healing centers in my brain. So I need my brain to recover. I need my brain to feel quite chilled and calm. So it was a bit of, I was kind of working with that uncertainty. And uncertainty is a weird thing. You can't, it's the irony, you can't do anything about it. The only thing you can do about it is say that it's uncertain. So there's a weird, I don't like the word acceptance, because it's a complex word, but there's a settling into and a sitting alongside uncertainty. And for me, I broke that all the way back down, and it meant that I lived minute by minute by minute. And so we didn't talk about the future, which is very not me. We didn't talk about, I would visualize certain things that I wanted and use those as kind of goals and aspirations. But if you're blind, and and plenty of people in the world, by the way, live blind and have fulfilled and completely happy lives. It's different for me, because I was a fully sighted person who lost their sight.
Right.
And so I'm in a completely different place. So I didn't want to stay blind. I wanted my sight back. And to get it back, I knew it was a fight and it was a climb, but I was prepared to do it one step. And in fact, I had a phrase very early on with the changes, and my vision took over a year to return. And I'm still partially sighted. But I realized that it was going to be extraordinarily slow progress, because optic nerves don't like being inflamed, they don't like being damaged, and they take a long time to heal. Any neuro-ophthalmologist will tell you it's like it's a slow build here. And so I said, this is, I would call a day, if I had any change, I call it a grain of sand day. I say, I've got a grain of sand back and I'm building a beach. And that was partly to shut the family up a little bit, to go, don't ask me every day. You could probably ask me every month what those changes are.
Yeah.
So you do, going from 100 miles an hour to 0, there's a lot of lessons that I learned. And I also learned small wins are the massive wins. The big wins are not the big wins at all. It's the tiny, tiny, tiny ones. Like when my kids nicked the stick and I got it. And actually on the way, I found a pair of my son's, pants on the way, and I picked them up. That's a win. That's a huge win. Small things would become huge, and we would celebrate them, and the kids would celebrate it. And so we lived by a series, multiple small wins every single day.
Yeah.
And that's how I dealt with uncertainty.
I think that it's absolutely fascinating that you, I know you said you struggled as well. That's clear, but that you were able to get to that point, because I imagine that it would be very easy to spiral downwards when you're faced with, again, like you said, you had your sight and you lost it. It's not like this was something that you knew. You didn't know anything else. Another thing you have mentioned, which was one of my initial thoughts actually when you started talking, was that you were the linchpin in your family. And I do think that that's worth talking about, just from the perspective of, your personality, but being a wife, being a mother. I feel like a lot of women would be in that situation. Like if they were to be out of commission tomorrow, what would their family do? How would they react? And that's not to say anything about your family or anything, but I do think that there is something so, there is such an interesting aspect of that as well, for a woman to have completely lost all control. What was it like, kind of having to cede that control a little bit?
Oh, yes, very hard. I remember lying in the hospital bed. My mother-in-law had given me a load of her raspberry canes, which I was going to plant in the garden. And my head was always, as a producer, was full of work stuff, but it was also full of the house. This needs doing, that needs doing, this, the classic hunter-gatherer. So I have, 27 things on my agenda. And that was very frustrating because that didn't go away. So I would lie in this bloody hospital bed thinking, no, but I know they're all walking past the raspberry canes. And I would say to everyone that came at some stage or other, if they were going to the house, could you just put them in a pot with some soil? Don't let them die.
Mm.
And they would look at me like I was insane.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really important to me because yes, I did everything. And actually the community was amazing. People were dropping food off. And the other difficulty was that we had to we created like a Google Drive for my care because the NHS is phenomenal and I had incredible care. I'm not sure I'd want to have my situation happen again now. I think post-COVID, many NHS services are struggling.
Mm.
I got incredible care, but they couldn't do around the clock. And I needed around the clock care. So the staff pushed in this great big squishy, squashy chair, which we called the marshmallow chair. And everybody slept on that. So I had someone with me 24/7.
Wow.
So we were having to rotate a person at the hospital with me because I couldn't get up off the bed to walk. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't even get a glass of water. And they didn't have the staff for that. So, but then we needed someone to come and look after the children. So we had all sorts of people moving in, and we actually thankfully had a bed that splits into two. And I had all sorts of people up in that room sharing, looking after the children. And so there was a united effort, and that was fantastic. But I do remember it was my daughter's 5th birthday actually while I was in the hospital. It all happened actually on her birthday.
Mm.
And I had got halfway through the plans and the organising, and I remember sitting dictating it all to my sister-in-law, who then picked it all up and went off and ran it all. And it was, have you got the pink napkins? Have you got the pony this and the unicorn that? Because she's 5, isn't she? That's all she wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to hand over a lot of that, and it was very uncomfortable. I didn't like doing that. But as I say, that flipped when I came home because then that became the drive to recover.
Yeah.
You have to balance it though, because my nervous system would tell me off if I did too much, and my whole body would start shaking again, and I'd have to go and do the breathing exercises, the visualization. And you can see where that led me. I mean, I ended up going down that road because the mind-body practice road, because I learned to use it. So I had to learn to regulate my body.
Mm.
And so, but the fact that I could then do that was so inspiring and amazing. That set me on a path to understand that, which is why I've had this interest in science ever since, and why I teach mind body practices, why I've written about it. And then did another experiment with Tristan, a whole 3-year project, which was a PhD project, all on mind body practices. Because of that, you can be somebody who's controlling or somebody who needs to be in control, or someone who is the linchpin in a family. But the part of that control is the responsibility of knowing when to have downtime, when to stop, how to stop, and how to regulate your own nervous system, because otherwise you burn out.
Yeah. I love that you had a community come together for you. I think that's, it shows the best sides of humanity. But I also imagine that was really difficult to accept, just in, again, being so singularly focused, motivated. You were the person getting things done, and now you had to kind of accept the help. I do think, when you're talking about mind-body connection, what's so interesting is you were kind of forced into something where your body was so obvious with what it needed, right? And that it was connected, but the mind-body connection was there. And I think a lot of times our body is giving us cues and we're not listening, and we're able to ignore them, and we're able to just push them away. And you really got to a point where you couldn't. You were literally, in a hospital bed. You could not change anything there. You couldn't ignore it anymore. So to a certain degree, is there, you have this knowledge because of that other people maybe don't have. You kind of have a leg up on some other people in terms of how to recognize when your body is telling you you need to stop or you need to slow down. So what is advice that you would give to people in recognizing these things so that, obviously this was a virus, it wasn't anything that you did, but what would be things that you would tell people to look for?
So there's a couple of things here. The virus was the trigger, not the illness. The illness was an autoimmune neurological condition. So that we don't know, but they think that was the trigger that kicked off my immune system to attack itself.
Okay.
So I'd had no warning and no cues. There was nothing to ignore apart from the fact that everyone thought I'd had flu. But no, I don't think I did have flu. We just don't know what I had and what it kicked off. But it kicked off this reaction in my body, like an autoimmune reaction. But the thing about cues, I think, is very interesting because listening to cues is something that I learned to do and became very attuned to. And I think that's probably the thing that I do the best now. I'm very good at reading my own body. I had to read my own body in order to help it recover. I had to read the world differently to learn how to see again. You don't just see again, you have to relearn it. You have to learn the rules of seeing. And the rules of walking. So I'm quite good at, and as I say, when things got too much to know, to find ways to calm the body down. So this idea of having cues, a lot of people do get cues and don't know they're there. Our body shouts at us sometimes and we ignore it. But again, that's also social conditioning. And unless you've done a little bit of mind-body work, it kind of means nothing to you. I have conversations with people and they literally look over my head without a Scooby-Doo about what I'm saying. It all comes down to self-awareness. But you can learn that. That's a great thing.
Yeah.
And the groups that I teach are skeptics. I particularly teach skeptic people. All the projects I've done ever since my illness, I've done a big nature connection project with Derby University, which is all now in the community. And I've done my own teaching and research work, always from the skeptic perspective, from the idea of what you're saying is rubbish. And my challenge is always to go, right, okay, let's make it not rubbish for you. Because it's good to question. We shouldn't just accept things blindly. But there are probably ways that we could all be more in tune with our bodies and help ourselves. Because helping yourself is probably my big mantra. Out of all of this, it's about, helping yourself. Oh, and just the other thing about the controlling, perhaps it's a dichotomy or it's a contradiction, perhaps is a better word. When I was at home and people were coming to help, I was immensely grateful. And actually, because I'm a collaborator and a producer, having a team is a natural thing for me. And so having people around and coming and doing things was what I wanted. And I find, because I've given lots of talks to people and there's often someone who said, I don't want to ask for help. I'm actually the opposite, because that's what networking is, essentially. I love asking other people. I actually don't have a problem with that. It's the difficulty with being a controlling personality is that if they do it wrong or they don't do it, I've had to learn that people will do things their own way.
Yeah.
That's what I have to learn.
Yeah.
Is to back off and go, right, they're cooking lasagna for the kids and yes, they're giving them chips. Back off.
They're getting fed.
But the fact that they're in the house doing that is collaborative.
Yeah.
And that fits with me and my worldview that we have to do that. The controlling part for me isn't them coming in, it's giving them
how
chips.
They're doing it. Yeah. No, I mean, I think too, like there's a difference between being controlling and being in control. Yeah. And I think it's, for somebody that functions very highly, that has a lot on their plate day to day, it can only be jarring to be completely stripped of that and say, okay, you actually can't do any of that stuff right now. And like, maybe we'll get there, but right now you only have the option to receive. And, as far as collaboration is concerned, that's not really collaboration either, right? That's just receive. And that can feel really uncomfortable as somebody that does struggle with asking for help sometimes is, just the receiving and feeling like I'm not giving anything back. Now, I'm not saying that's how you felt, but I do think that there is something so intense about just, again, the kind of snapping your fingers moment of now you were here and now you're there, miles away. And how do you get back some semblance of your normal?
The normal thing is a really interesting thing. Again, I've written 2 books and I wrote a lot about this in my first book about you're always seeking a new normal because you won't get back your old normal. You get a new normal. And that new normal, you have to shape it to fit you. It isn't, it's not the natural hand and glove that you might have had already in your life because you've just gone on through life and you've never stopped and thought about it. When you have the kind of train crash situation where you're forced to think about it, you have to decide what your new normal is even going to be. So there's a lot more choice in it. And I remember kind of feeling that there's this sense of holding your breath. When something big happens, everybody takes a collective breath. And then everybody holds it for quite a long time. And I remember thinking, no one's going to let go of that breath until I announce or I show in some way that life is now normal. And so I did become aware of that quite early on. And so I did quite a lot of things to look or appear to be normalized. So I went and did a diploma. I went and trained to be an executive coach. And I did that quite early. I did that, what was that? Probably a year on. So I booked it while I was still legally blind, partly because I knew I was so determined that I was going to do it. And that was a massive challenge because I had to travel to a new location and traveling is still really difficult for me, orientating. I find it very difficult sometimes to get around unfamiliar places because I don't see quickly enough. And new people and things like when they're writing on whiteboards, they use red pen. It's like, oh God. So I have to sit at the front and then I have to go and, there were lots of little strategies. I learned a lot of strategies doing that. But I think things like that sort of signaled to the rest of the family that this is now normal again. And this is Ness doing what looked like normal things. And certainly for children, you've got to mirror normal life. But
sure,
for a year, and that was a large proportion of their life. They'd lived this slightly weird, different family life. But at the same time, it was also it was normal.
Yeah.
We were going to parks, we were doing things. And it made them very intuitive. It made them be sensitive. So they'd forever take my hand on a dark corner or steps or anything, or they'd check my safety. And so it made them, I think, quite sensitive and kind kids. They were always quite good with their peers at school. I think that's partly because they had to learn a whole set of new skills very quickly so that we could all go out the house and do things. We had to be a team.
Yeah. I love how expansive your view is and how much room there is in it, because I think it only serves us as human beings when we make the decision to allow for change and allow for growth, even if we don't like the way that it's happening. So I think that's a really important part of being a human being. You've mentioned that vision, there's a lot of aspects to vision. And I just think it's really fascinating and interesting that, again, as somebody who had sight, lost it and got it back, how it came back was such a process and a prolonged thing. Was when you were going through that, did you feel like, were there parts where you felt like, okay, this is it, like this is as far as I'm getting with it? Or were you continually pushing yourself to get more back?
there was a constant push, and I don't think that ever goes. As you get older, you expect to deteriorate, and because I'm in a post-recovery, I'm slightly sort of butting up against that. I remember going to see a colour specialist, and they did a load of tests with me. And actually, it was quite interesting because they couldn't understand why I could see certain things with the low level of colour sight that I had. Because colour, I still lack a lot of colour. And that's partly because I've trained myself to see in particular ways. And also I have, so I could see before. So I know the rules of seeing, as I said before. I know how to see. I know what colour is. I know what red is, blue is. I know what all the ranges, I can see all the different tones of green. And so there's some residual knowledge of the world that I can apply to certain situations that will seemingly boost or enhance what I'm seeing. So, because sometimes people, think, like at one time I used to get asked this question all the time. Did you have superhuman hearing when you couldn't see? And it's like, it's the most ridiculous question. No, but what I did do is use my hearing much more effectively and efficiently than I ever did beforehand, because I was compensating. And so there's a level of compensation that's constantly going on with me, which is why I get tired, because I have to work harder to see the same as everyone else.
Sure.
But I do have an example of that. I was buying, with a friend, we were buying a scarf and a little purse for a friend's big birthday. There's a number of us all putting together. And it was in velvet. So velvet's difficult to see at the best time because it's so reflective. And we had this petrol blue scarf, and we were at the till, and my friend was holding this very cute little purse, also made in velvet. And I suddenly went, it's not the same tone. And she was like, yeah, it is. I'm like, no, it's not. And that's because she'd been talking and I'd been looking at the two closely. And we went to the window, and with the lady selling, the saleswoman, and we all went, it's not the same. And my friend, of course, looked at me and went, how? I was like, well, I don't know, but I know I'm going to be really tired later, because just doing this is exhausting. And I still don't know exactly how, and I have worked with vision scientists, but I think it's a case of I've trained myself to notice more. I don't see more, but I don't lose as many details perhaps as other people. So that might be the way to see it, to describe it. So that sense of constantly fighting to keep or to get back is still there. And so I think it exists in that situation. I think that's kind of the undercurrent there, is that constantly striving for more. And I don't think that will ever go away, because I miss not having full vision, of course. So, I will put myself in situations. I've learned to avoid situations where I'll struggle and where my low vision will cause me a problem. So I don't go to busy festivals anymore. I won't go and meet a friend in a very dark pub or a bar or a restaurant, a busy restaurant. If I do, they come to the door or they wave like crazy people, and they know that, and I text from outside. I won't put myself into those situations where I'm going to feel vulnerable. It's very rare that it happens now. It happened all the time. And because those are horrible reminders, and I don't want those, so I avoid them.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's called resilience, I think.
I don't think that's a bad thing, you know your triggers. Because at the end of the day, what you did go through was trauma. So, it is absolutely, it makes sense that there are fallouts from that there are things even now that you will still struggle with, even if it's something that you couldn't necessarily put an exact name or reason to, because unfortunately that's the way trauma works. I love that you wrote everything down. I think that is super interesting, to be in that mindset again, going through trauma. And you did say survival mode, which is very true. And a lot of us lack the ability to kind of take that step back and think about, okay, I'm going to want this later on. And not just even if you did know that you wanted it, the energy it takes to do that in those moments is a lot. So the fact that you did it and did it consistently is actually quite amazing. When did you start kind of going through that?
I didn't touch any of it. And in fact, I had no intention. I'd collected it all. So the diaries were the diaries, and they very quickly went, as I say, to these audio recordings. And it was only after I'd given a number of interviews, or maybe I'd written the book and I'd said about it, and a journalist basically found out about it and contacted me. She was doing a piece for BBC Radio 4. And she said, can I have access to your recordings? To which, of course, I vehemently said, no, you can't.
Yeah.
Duh. But I did say, no, she was very good. I give her credit. She was very sensitive. I'm implying that she wasn't. She was sensitive. It was an episode for shortcuts on colour. And so I was actually really interested. And so she said, look, I'll put it forward, but you produce it. You produce the whole thing. And so that was, of course, the perfect compromise. So I edited everything, the pieces, the clips, and I curated how that kind of got put together. And she was very respectful of it. So it was a very collaborative piece. I was really happy to do it. And that was really interesting. The first time I listened to it.
Wow.
And they are quite raw, and my voice sounds different. And so listening to that was, and of course, then there's the whole interesting thing about false memory that comes in, because I've written about memory as well. It's very interesting how we remember experiences. And of course, memory comes into how we see all the time, because it's our, memory bank that helps us predict what we're going to see. So it's a very integral part. And I thought that was really interesting, how some of the things I remember certain clips, I remember recording them, and perhaps in my mind, I might have logged them as a, gosh, that was a particularly heartfelt, comment. And then I'll listen back to it and it sounds banal or different to how I remembered it. And then something else that I hadn't particularly clocked was really impactful. I found it very interesting that my own memory of my own narration was very unreliable. But yes, it was great to use it for a creative piece. I think it made it quite powerful. Yeah. So that was, but I haven't done anything else with it. And I don't think it's not meant for that. The reason I did all of that was that I had the data, so that when I did work with Cambridge University and worked with a vision scientist, worked with Tristan, I had this huge body of data to be able to refer to. So that meant that when I was going through the kind of visual history, it meant I had a chronological, accurate representation of what happened at what stage. And I worked with Will Harrison, who's a vision scientist, an Australian scientist, who was based at Cambridge. And he said I was basically like Hubel and Weasel's cats. The Hubel and Weasel obviously won the Nobel Peace Prize for their work on vision, and understanding the kind of component parts and the development of cat vision. So working out how cats see, but the component parts of that, and what comes in when, and what part of vision facilitates another part of vision. And he's like, it's like having a real cat. You're like a human cat. But what was interesting is I knew nothing about their work, but what I said corroborated and sat alongside that research. So that was quite interesting for him to have this human talking person that's saying stuff that has a symmetry with, quite groundbreaking science at the time it was. So that was, and then that rebounded back to me. So the fact that symmetry was there and he was able to explain that back to me was reassuring, weirdly. I don't know that there was a really nice relationship going on there where, but he did say something which has never left me. He did, I don't think I asked him, again, I could remember that wrong, but he said, I don't think you would see half of what you see now if you hadn't done all of your experimentation and pushed and challenged your vision and constantly refreshed it. It said it's like you went to the vision gym and you worked every piece of equipment. And so your legs, your, gluteus, your biceps, everything got a workout. And so if you convert that to a visual anomaly, a visual metaphor, so let's say, you're working your color, muscle, you're working your acuity muscle, you're working your color your contrast sensitivity muscles. So you're working all these different component parts by all the experimenting that I did. And that was quite scary, because what if I hadn't have done that? Because no one told me to do it.
Yeah, but I think that's probably, it's probably very true. And I think it is a testament to the fact that our bodies do respond so much to what our minds are thinking, telling us, whatever. So, even just on a very basic level of positivity, the power of positivity and how it affects our being and our physical and physiological beings is just so fascinating. And I do think that there is something very true to that. And it's very fascinating. I also love what you said about memory, because especially being in trauma spaces, our memories are not perfect at the best of times. And trauma is like really just the biggest thing to mess with your brain. So having, and I'm only speaking from my own experience in terms of there are things that I forget. There are things that I remember very clearly, but did they really happen exactly like that? Was that the big deal, or was it something else that happened that I can't remember? And it is really interesting to know. And I don't necessarily want to go back and listen to myself talking about it. I didn't do that, but, so I understand you're not really wanting to relive that. That makes a lot of sense. But the fact that you have that to kind of access, and that's kind of what you got out of it, I think is really interesting.
It had to be for a purpose. It had to be for something that was creative, something that had some meaning attached to it. And so that's why it was fine to do. Trauma is a funny thing. You can rewire you can rewire your brain, because that's what I'd already done, and I knew that. So I had a very traumatic birth with my first child, my daughter. So much so that I was not going to have a second child. And I know that's not uncommon at all. Hypnobirthing and using all the breathing techniques was so astonishingly effective that it convinced me, because I completely rewrote the first experience and imprinted the second experience on it. So whenever I see anybody that's pregnant, which is less and less now that I've got teenagers, but if I do ever come across anybody who is expecting a baby, I only give them all the good stories, because fear is the last thing you want in that space. And so to be able to rewrite fear with this absolute kind of ecstatic power, I don't even know if I've got the words to describe. The second experience was so powerful and amazing. Bloody hurts, of course it does. But it was so powerful and extraordinary and incredible and inspiring. So to rewrite fear with that, knowing you can do that with your own brain, is like, wow. Well, okay, what else can I rewrite? And so I do think, that knowledge, and when you have the evidence, see, I'm big evidence. I'm nerdy scientist myself now these days. I'm a researcher. Everything has to be evidence, but I've proven it to myself. And I did it again because I was invited to give a TEDx talk, and I, like millions of other people, are actually terrified of doing public speaking, and my fear manifested in sleepless nights, so I wouldn't sleep. And that, of course, is a bit of a circling back to my illness. Sleeplessness was one of my kind of symptoms. And so you're going to go and give this big talk. It's timed. You've got a great big clock on the stage. It's got 3 cameras. I've got an AV. It's got 1,000 people. There's a lot of things there to, to cause that sleepless night. And I've got 23-minute talk, and it has so many things to remember, and a very complex presentation. And so I went and used hypnosis again. I went to a hypnotherapist and worked with her very, very closely. A local lady called Jane. And that was brilliant, because I then overwrote that fear with excitement. And that's all we did. We just went into the experience and we just told my brain, no. You're not scared. You're just bubbling with excitement. You can't wait. And so I was fascinated that worked. I had probably the best night's sleep I've almost ever had. The night before my TED talk, I walked onto stage. I was nervous. Of course you are nervous, but I was fine.
Yeah.
I was second on stage. All the AV didn't work. The headphones were set at the wrong levels. I just absolutely went with it. And I when I go back into that experience, I almost feel like that was nothing to do with me. It was to do with this incredible way that you can rewire your memories, if you like. You can replace them. And that's kind of scary and weird, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah. It again puts you in the driver's seat. And as you've already said, self-awareness and helping yourself, it's the most important thing. So hypnotherapy, I am very unfamiliar with it as a practice. How did you find it? Like what, I know you talked about your birth with your son. Was that your introduction to it?
Hypnobirthing was absolutely the introduction. And I was extremely skeptic, because the thing about hypnotherapy is you don't think you're doing anything. And having studied this a lot more since, it's very close to visualization. Visualization comes into hypnotherapy an awful lot. There's often metaphors of nature, very relaxing scenes. Your body has to go into a relaxed state to be into a trance, which is the hypnotic state. And then you use suggestion. And that's all it is. You're just suggesting to the brain, but to the unconscious part of the brain that's always listening and always got its eye out and, keeping its radar. But this is the below the cognition kind of part of the brain. This is that big, unfathomable part of us that we know exists. And it's called lots of different things and lots of different models of neuroscience and psychology. And that's the part that you talk to. And actually, hypnotherapy is the bridge to get there for me. Now, as I say, not everybody is hypnotizable, but I am. And when I did the second experiment with Tristan, I went through 10 different types of mind-body practices. Actually, it was 14 in the end, but it was 10 different main modalities, and hypnotherapy is one of them for that exact reason. And I did an experiment in the book, a second book I wrote. I did an experiment before and after to rewire my brain for a particular situation to see if I could change the outcome. And hypnotherapy is really interesting. Mostly it's very successful, but it's very nuanced. So if you don't use exactly the right language, if you don't, like, your brain won't get what you mean. You have to say it. You can't use nuance. It has to be very precise language. And if I've used exactly the right precise language, which we did by chance, thankfully, for the TEDx talk, and so it worked perfectly. I have tried it for other circumstances and it's worked fairly well, but not as well. And then I've realized that's because I didn't use exactly the right language. So the words matter is what I'm saying. But hypnotherapy is very powerful. It's a bit scary sometimes, I think. You don't dabble with it. You do it with a professional. But I do think being able to access that tool, for me personally, I feel quite comfortable now. I kind of know my boundaries. And so I will use self-hypnosis in particular situations to calm my body. It can be, and also because there's conditioning. So suggestion also works with conditioning. So, and also there's evidence. So my body goes, yeah, skeptic brain is really alive. It's going, don't believe this is rubbish. We're back to just, no, we're going to question it. And then the other part of the brain goes, yeah, but it worked last time. and then you find, oh, it worked again.
Yeah.
And so I'm always surprised every single time I use it. The skeptic's always very live and kicking. But it's an extraordinary modality, but you need to use a really reputable hypnotherapist. Don't dabble. That would be all my caveats with it.
There you go. I like that.
Don't dabble. If you want to get somewhere close to a hypnotherapy, see if you might like it, then visualization is a really good place to go. Again, a good reputable track that just puts you into a relaxed state, then yes, it can also have similar effects in terms of calming the nervous system.
Yeah. I just think it's so important to, we talk about mind-body connection and what we need to be doing for our minds. First of all, that there are different modalities. I think that's something that we don't talk about, especially in the Western world. It's like very medication focused. This stuff doesn't work. It's all very woo-woo and whatever. But there's actual data and science behind it. And I think that we just do ourselves a disservice when we refuse to even consider the possibility that our brains are so powerful and so malleable, and we have the power to do something about it. But I also love that, in talking about modalities, you've flat out said this may not work for you, because I think when people start going into mindfulness practices, they pick one thing and it doesn't go well, and they're like, okay, no, see, like this doesn't work. And it's like, well, there's a lot out there, and maybe this doesn't work, but something else could.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and that's kind of where I come from. My recipe for surviving that experience back in 2012 was a hodgepodge. It was a combination of different things. It was visualization. It was yogic breathing. It was actually one specific breath. I still teach it all the time. I love it. It's called Golden Thread, and it's a classic where you breathe in and then out for longer. Any breath that has in shorter, out longer is going to calm the nervous system. And a little bit of the hypnosis, which again is, so there's 3 modalities going on there. And I totally agree. And also, mindfulness is only one type of meditation. There are actually over 300.
Wow.
I did an episode with a researcher who researches the categorization of meditation. And she and I have very nerdy conversations about this because they are all extraordinarily different. That is the one thing that I found doing the experiment when we had all the people coming in and having their brains recorded, and people started asking questions. Well, you've just used mindfulness here. We used a very classic being present moment awareness, mindfulness practice for, so the people during that experiment, they came in, they wore the headset, they did a baseline. So that was just sitting there for a minute, and the researcher would say to them, close your eyes and think. And they'd be like, well, think about what? Well, what do you have for breakfast? Oh, okay. And they close their eyes, and of course, then they're off. And they'll think about anything, and then the little beeper would go, and then they go, right, now listen to this guided mindfulness track and follow what they say. And so you've got this great picture between those 2 ways of using your mind. But people would come out of this experiment. We had 200 people go through this, and we had queuing down the road. It had to be extended, this project, because we got to show people the inside of their brain, their mind. What does your mind look like? Oh, well, I can show you. And it was all color coded and all this beautiful animation. So it was really cool. And, but people would say, well, occasionally there would be somebody who was quite educated about meditation practices. And one person said to me, what if I use transcendental meditation in there? Would that animation look different? And of course, I knew nothing. So I was like, what's transcendental meditation? They're like, oh, well, it's this, you use this mantra. I'm like, what's a mantra? So I did not like this as a producer. This was really uncomfortable territory. So I went off and did a load of research and went back to Tristan and went, Tristan, there's hundreds of different mindfulness is just one thing, and actually it's a very small part of many other practices. And of course he just grinned at me and went, hello.
welcome.
And he actually did, it wasn't his area of research actually, but he's like, come talk to me, what are you talking about, come on, where are you going on this? I went, I want to explore them all. I'm not going through, So then I started off and I looked at compassion practices. I looked at Kundalini yoga. I did MBCT, which is a really good foundation practice using, obviously, mindfulness. But then I separated out body scans because that's very different from a breath awareness practice. Oh, what else did I do? I did breath work, a completely different modality. So I did, as I say, 14 different practices, and I ended with psychedelics. And all of them are different ways to physiologically impact and change your brain state, your state of mind. And they were all completely different. And I did TM as well. They were so different. And that's the one thing I've learned. And also I got on with some better than others. Like I did Vipassana, which is, if nobody knows, is hardcore. Don't anybody tell you that it's easy and that it's for beginners. I don't believe that. You go on a silent retreat for 11 days. Everyone calls it 10 days. It's not, it's 11 days. And you meditate for 10 hours a day and you don't talk to anybody else. And I do not think that is an easy task for anybody. But it was extraordinarily successful for me for certain things. I often get asked, which is the best one? It's like, well, for what? And that's my point. So I take a bespoke approach now to mind body practices. So exactly what you said. You try one, doesn't work, in inverted commas, work for what? And actually it may well have done something, but maybe not what you were looking for it to do. That's annoying, but that happens a lot. But maybe you could try a different practice and you learn from that so you can explore. So I will, if you like, prescribe a practice for my individual situation. So I've got different practices I use for different situations. And I think for me as a Westerner, that's my approach. I haven't been brought up with one school of meditation. It's not embedded in my family. So therefore, I have the opportunity to take from multiple disciplines and see what works for me. So that's what I do. And that's what I teach. So I get skeptic women come to my group and they go, I can't meditate. It doesn't work. Like, fantastic. Brilliant. Come. And let's have it not work together with my other ladies for who it doesn't work, who've been coming for 3 years every week constantly because they come because it doesn't work or do anything.
Right. That is actually fabulous.
And we all do laugh at ourselves a lot. But I have them doing some weird practices. There's some really crazy practices out there. And every so often I'll throw something in because they've got quite experience now. And they'll be like, that's so bad. Like, I love that. So we love it. We get really nerdy and excited and we play around with lots of different practices now because mindfulness is the doorbell to meditation.
Okay.
It's the entry point and it's fantastic. But there's so much more beyond the door.
Yeah. I imagine it's a little bit addictive in a way to realize that you have this power to affect your brain state, right? And to enter into this and realize, oh my goodness, this actually works. And I'm seeing physical results from something that I am doing with nobody else's, outward help. So I imagine it's pretty easy once you get started to want to look into other things as well, to want to explore a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy. And also society does everything kind of to stop you doing it. I find a meditation practice is the easiest and the hardest thing in the world because yes, it's easy because when I do it, it's always a good experience. Even if it's a bad experience, it was a good thing to do. And what I mean is that, I'll sit there and my mind's still racing and it doesn't change. Right. Meditation doesn't change your day, doesn't change your life. It doesn't change the world. It just changes your view of it. That's it. It's not a panacea. It's not a replacement for medication. It's not a replacement for Western medicine. It's a really good companion and it's a really good antidote for you to be able to actively do something for yourself in the moment when you're feeling stressed.
Yeah.
But you have to tread carefully. You don't have to dip very much below the surface to prod traumatic experiences with a meditation practice. I've seen that happen. We all practice together in a group for that reason. So one of the things that I find is unhelpful that Westerners do is that we do a little bit of this cherry picking that I'm talking about, but we do it all on our own, sitting on the sofa. And we put massive expectations onto that. And it has to be more of a life practice for it to have any kind of embedded kind of benefit. And you need to do it with other people and support. So it's like the Buddhists have a Sangha. So that's what we create, is this group of support. And so it's the practice, but it's also the group. And it's that community of women together. So it's not just one thing, it's multiple things. But you also have to practice, you have to do it. And we all forget, I forget, and I fall off the wagon all the time. All the researchers I know in this area, we all do the same thing because we're all human. And my mind can give me 10 reasons why I shouldn't do it or should do something else. And social media, you have to fight all these other impulses. So I don't think it's easy, but it's definitely something that eases. I go for the 2% better. I don't even do Dan Harris's 10%. I'm like, let's take the edge off 2%. And, if you're having a really shit day and someone says to you, right, I can just take the edge off. Oh, all right. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what it is for me. It's constantly taking the edge off.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the world, but it can just get your breath back.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest, or what would you say is the danger to somebody pursuing this on their own and not having any support around them and kind of stumbling into their own trauma?
Oh, I think that happens a lot. We are much better over the last I think I've seen it coming in, it's probably been longer than this, but certainly 7 to 10 years, I've seen a lot more. I mean, we're very trauma informed. In fact, we've got to be very careful we don't go the other way and actually traumatize ourselves by educating ourselves about trauma. I think we've got to be really, really careful. And actually, I think also, what we're talking about, those memories and experiences, actually, I think sometimes staying within the body is much better. So, for example, with new people that come to my group, we only do body practices. So we are much more trauma informed. And there's a lot of good work on that. I think the danger is if you sit at home on your own, on your sofa by yourself, you run the risk of walking into territory that you didn't even know you were going to walk into. Because the practice, it takes you deep, it takes you inside yourself. And our mind can be a frightening place. Our thoughts can be frightening. It's easy to walk into trauma territory, I think. The second you go inside your own mind, it's a scary place. There are memories, there are realizations, and that sort of discovery journey for self-awareness, we come across. We can go with an agenda. I want this, this, and this. And inevitably, that's not what you get. You can get a whole load of other things that you didn't know were there or very close to the surface. And so trauma can be problematic. I think it's a lot more problematic than people realize. So I do tread very carefully. As I say, I only do body-based practices with new ladies and I go very gently. One of the projects I do at the moment is forest bathing for partly this reason. Using sensory techniques, walking in nature. That's what forest bathing is. There's no water. It's basically a slow, silent walk, absorbing the woodland atmosphere. It's a Japanese health prescription. But the reason I like it, it's really good for people who've had trauma responses to something like meditation because you are not in your head. You're absolutely the opposite. It's the complete polar opposite to meditation. You are out of your head, in your senses. And that's why if you look at research, you will often find that walking meditation is one of the safest, one of the most well-liked by new practitioners or people who've had trauma, because basically your body feels safe. You're not inside the thoughts. You're not even having to consider what they are. What we find with, we did a study and we found with forest bathing, we did it in urban local parks, is that rumination dropped by 50%. So if you think about what meditation is, you're kind of ruminating.
Yeah.
We don't want to ruminate. We don't want to necessarily do that. But being in the mind is being alongside those thoughts and having a relationship with them. Whereas forest bathing, thoughts aren't even on the agenda. It's just your senses. And at the end, if people came with anxiety, social isolation, all sorts of different problems, people come feeling very, very nervous. It's a community-led project now. And so people come to these sessions and they're running local parks. We get lots of people who, they come because they don't have to talk. They come because it's something they don't have to do inside their heads. So, it's not therapy. It's just about relaxation. And because they learn all these lovely, gentle sensory exercises and using sight, sound, touch, it feels body-based but safe. And at the end, they get fixated on a leaf or a berry. And so that worry about being lost inside your mind is gone. So they've got a lot of the end expectations, the things you might hope for from a meditation, half an hour of meditation. They get it through forest bathing. They get a lot of the same outcomes, but without being in their head. So it's very powerful. That's why I like body-based practices.
Yeah. It's a really interesting distinction. And as somebody who's very new to like the mind-body connection space, it's fascinating hearing that there are so many different modalities that there's really, it just makes me think of how much we all contain, there are multitudes within all of us, and that we have access to it, and we have to be responsible with how we access, but that there is so much that we can do for ourselves, and there's so much power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have huge potential, and I think the only thing you need is a bit of curiosity and a bravery to take the first step. And I see that, as I say, this is community-led, so there's a number of local people who've been trained up to lead these sessions. And they're all free. They're all running local parks. And they're all exactly the same model that I devised with this health researcher at Derby University. We did this project together and came up with this model. And so it's exactly the same thing in every single park. And they're every week. And we had somebody go a couple of weeks ago to one session. And she was very nervous about going, this lady. And she'd had some health issues, and I could feel her when she was emailing me. She was wanting to cancel, and I said, "Look, just go with curiosity, because actually, I can't tell you this will be the outcome, but you might feel better at the end. So, is it worth having a go?" And she was really grateful that someone had replied to her, and I'd like to think it was gentle encouragement. Anyway. We've got a session on Sunday. She's coming back with a friend, and she's already emailed me how excited she is. And I just jumped for joy at that, because she was clearly struggling, maybe suffering some social anxiety. She didn't disclose the full range to me, but I know enough to know that she was worried, and curiosity took her, and maybe a gentle nudge. And what did she get out of it? She got a really relaxing experience and a joyful experience that's now taking her back again with someone else. So there's so much to unpack there, and so much that excites me. And I think for me, that's why nature connection is a really good gateway. You don't have to go and do a mind-body practice necessarily. You can go and do slow, mindful walking in nature. You can try a mind-body practice standing at the sink. Just feel your feet. Just drop your attention all the way into your feet. We start with feet. New people in my class, we do loads on feet. Feet tend to be, not always, they don't always have to be a safe place for everybody, but they're commonly a kind of safe zone. And it's fascinating to feel your feet. And people can get really excited. On our sessions, we start with just feeling your feet. And I have come to the end of sessions where people are still on their feet. They've not got past that. They're like, oh, my feet. Walking slowly, I felt everything. I felt every twig. It's like, wow. It's like, and you have these people that are like little children at the end going, wow, did you? And I'm like, yeah, love, I've done 700 of these. So I'm with you. I am with your berry. I'm with your leaf. I am with your feet. And yes, I know the clouds are beautiful. And it's wonderful being around people when they feel like this, which is why our volunteers come every single time, because it's infectious.
Yeah.
It makes you feel really good.
And you're making a difference in your, because it's like you are giving people power.
Yes.
And that is just such a special place to be in. You're not responsible for propping somebody else up. You are just facilitating them being able to access what they already contain.
Yeah. And people get to the end and they often say things like, oh, wow, I've lived in this area. I've been to this park 100 times, hundreds of times. I've lived here 10 years. I've never seen it like this. So now you've opened the doors and I see this parking. And did you know there was a huge tree over there? Like, no, I hadn't noticed that tree. They see it with this excitement, this childlike glee, and there's this joy and this gratitude, and it's lovely to be around that. But it's also, you send them off and you know that the world will never be quite the same.
Yeah.
And that bit for me is why I keep going and doing it. And I have, in this local area in Southeast London, I've 4 times now gone into different parks, different green spaces, and I have caught people doing the exercises or showing someone else the exercises. On all occasions, they jumped up like a scolded cat and looked guilty. And I had to go up to them going, no, that's why we taught you them, is to show them. And they kind of would blush and look a bit embarrassed. I'm like, no, honestly, I can't tell you how happy I am that you're doing that exercise. But the fact that they are,
yeah.
And if I've caught them, well, how many other times? I'm like, yes, this is why I do it.
Yeah.
Because they've gone off. It meant something to them. It's allowed them to see the world differently. And it's allowed them to explore a way to find their own relaxation, their own neutral place, that equilibrium, that homeostasis, whatever you want to call it, that baseline that we need to sit at in order to maintain our nervous system. They found a way to regulate, and it's free and it's on their doorstep. And that for me is so powerful, which is why we call the project Park Bathe. It is forest bathing in a park.
Okay.
Park Bathe.
There you go.
So that's what it's called.
You have made such a leap from where you started to where you are now. Do you think this would have happened without your illness?
The illness was certainly a catalyst. Of course it was. And it sent me off in a journey of learning. It made me a nerd. I'm not as nerdy as some of the nerds I know. I don't do the analysis. But I certainly loved collecting data. I like asking questions. I like working with research. I love working with researchers. And that's what I find myself doing now is I come with all the creative ideas. I come with the resource, the networks, the communities. So I'm doing one right now. We're doing a project on dementia and Alzheimer's patients. I'm working with a researcher who spent 10 years in that field. We're combining my experience, having run Park Bathe for 3 years, and her experience. And we're going to be capturing a load of data. And we're both so excited because I'm not going near the analysis. She loves that, but she needs my experience and what I've learned and my ways of connecting with the community. And my experience limited, of course, in comparison, of data collection and of asking questions. So we're putting our heads together. And so I love that. And so that's collaboration again. So I probably would still be collaborating.
Yeah.
So everything I've just described, you could put that into a different section.
Sure.
I would have been doing that. But I love that it's science. And so for me, what I got out of this was science. And science is me. When I was at school, no one told me that. It was Bunsen burners and the periodic table. But no, science is me.
Yeah.
It's what makes me me. And it's fascinating, flipping the lid of your head and having a peer inside. And I am immensely curious. And I'm grateful that that curiosity that maybe wouldn't have been sparked in this way. I think that's definitely a causality. So no, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this for sure, but I probably would be doing something else.
Yeah.
And it'd be with lots of other people. But I'm very grateful it's taken me into well-being because that can only be better for me.
Yeah, right?
And hopefully those around me.
Sure. Hey, I can't, the proof is in the pudding, I think. You have had a lot of I mean, you have successful programs. They're running without you. That's the dream, right?
Yeah, I love that I oversee everything, and I'm light touch. I'm there to support the other community leaders. And in fact, we're just doing some more training now. We've just had two other organizations, and I'm training other bigger corporates. I'm going in and doing wellbeing training because it's taken me a long time to come to this place. And
Sure.
I also had to feel like I'd accrued enough knowledge and that I knew what it was I wanted to kind of pass on to people. And so now I'm really happy doing that. And I combine my nature connection work and all the research from that, and then learnings from that, and the power of that alongside my mind-body practices. So now that's my offering, is like this double-handed kind of offering. And that's very exciting. And when I go and train people, I jump around the place. I can't help being excited because I've lived it and I believe it. And I love working with skeptic people. I really do. Because for me, well, look at the baselines. When we were doing our study, the more skeptic the person was that came along, well, I look at them and I go, the bigger the reward.
Sure.
So it's fantastic. And actually, they tend to be the best advocates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I remember we had one guy on the study and his wife sent him. We had a lot of wives sending husbands because, of course, we have more women. We still work on the demographics. It's still hard to get certain demographics, although I'm working with a group of Muslim women at the moment, which is very exciting. That's very, very, very early, but I'm hoping there'll be more from that. We struggle with the men, and it's a bit of a cliche, but a lot of men have barriers to using nature connection. Some don't, of course. He was sent by his wife, and he turned up and he said what a lot of men say, and women too. I exercise. I'm already doing this. I'm already looking after my well-being. I go to the gym. I've just done a triathlon this morning. Look, I'm fit. And we're like, yeah, but this isn't about fitness. This has nothing to do with steps. You're going to cover a very short distance. This is about your heart health in a different way. We don't want, we're not looking at your fitness levels. We're looking at your stress levels. And that's a different thing. And actually, extreme exercise is very stressful on the body. We want to be able to regulate your nervous system and maybe allow it to rest. And maybe your body needs a rest. We didn't quite say all of that to him, of course. Anyway, he was very polite, lovely man. He was so polite, but he was so contained at the beginning. He so didn't want to be there. And we put heart chest monitors on certain participants to get heart rate variability scores because they're a really good measure of stress. And at the end, of course, he had the experience after an hour and he was like, oh my God. He says, I didn't realise how stressed I was. He said, I'm so sorry when I turned up. I think I was a bit rude. We're like, no, you were not rude. You were not rude, but I know you were really stressed and you didn't know it. He goes, I didn't know it. I had no idea how stressed I was. Because I'd just done that. He said, oh my God. So I've got to go tell all my mates. And he went, his wife emailed me and said, he's told everybody at barbecues. He keeps telling everybody about this. They all tell him he's joined a green cult. But I love that experience. And because that tells me so much. And so, the point with him, he doesn't have to give up his triathlons.
Yeah.
But after he does one, go and do 20 minutes, regulating your nervous system, doing these exercises in nature. Bring your body back down. So that's for me. It's about the balance.
Yeah. Fabulous. I feel like there is so much I can learn to learn. And I just really admire the journey that you're on and what you're doing, what you've chosen to take from your life and the direction that you've chosen to go with it. Yeah. So I do have a question that I ask everybody at the end of each episode, which is, through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Ooh. In the experiment I did with the 10 modalities, the most life-changing, I don't like that word, life-changing, the significant for me was compassion. Compassion blew my mind. So it's not what you think it is. And compassion, you have to work on. doesn't come easily if you've had certain life experiences. And I had to learn not to have compassion, but to unravel it, to find it, to like uncover it. It had been squashed and strangled by busyness, society, expectations, speed. Because you can't have compassion and be fast, you've got to be slow. And so moving the compassion boulder aside and kind of seeking it out was one of the most powerful things I ever did on my mind-body journey. So compassion is essential. It's a right. It's hard work. Sometimes it doesn't come with a stopper. So you can unleash it and it can be a bit overwhelming. So there's ways you need to learn to moderate it. But you got to start and have it for yourself first. It's the old oxygen mask analogy, I'm afraid, but it's very true. I see a lot of people struggle with compassion. We seem to think it's like kindness, that it makes you a doormat or that it's a weakness somehow. But actually, I think if anybody does practice compassion, they know it's the biggest superpower you have. It's the one way that you can change things. And the other thing I would say about compassion is it's an essential lens because it helps you understand the crappy things in life, because it's only when you have the crappy things happen that you get to apply compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that Buddhist monks will see compassion. So they see torture, difficult experiences. Buddhist monks that were captured and tortured, they went, "This is brilliant." I don't think they quite said it was brilliant, but they went, "We used it to exercise our compassion."
Yeah.
And I remember being like, "What the heck?" But now I understand what they're talking about.
Yeah.
You need crap stuff in life to flex those compassion muscles. And when you do tap it, it's one of the most powerful things ever. And I think it's something more people need to talk about.
That's fabulous. Thank you. So where can people find you?
So
your books and
So
I think you're going to have some new practitioners.
Yeah, well, I have several hats, which you might have gathered. So my mind body practices and my training and the workshops that I do, which are all in person and online, that's called Urban Reboot, and that is through vanessapotter.com. Park Bathe at the moment is run in Southeast London and Lanarkshire in Scotland. That's a community-led free project. That is, you can just Google Park Bathe. It's PARKBATHE. And that is, you can find that. There's a link tree. And anybody who lives in this area can come on one of those sessions for free. And there's women-only walks. There's all sorts of specialist walks. We're going to be having dementia sessions. So there's all sorts. It's a really lovely community. There's lots of information on the website.
Wonderful. Well, we will make sure to link your website to the show notes and people can get in touch with you there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this conversation. I really feel like I learned a lot. And I appreciate what you're doing.
No, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry for all the noise and the chaos, the dog barking.
No worry. That's
painter and decorators, the children, the teenagers.
That is life. That is life.
It is life.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.